This week's episode is sponsored by the Grim Hollow Campaign Guide, brought to you by our amazing friends at Ghostfire Games.
The Grim Hollow Campaign Guide is a perfect introduction to running dark fantasy in your games of 5th edition. For all of you fans of macabre horror and stories against dark creatures of the night such as vampires, demons, liches, and undead, and werewolves, this book has got you covered for how to run amazing adventures in worlds haunted by terrible creatures.
This book includes all sorts of rules for how to hunt these monsters or how to become them. So there's a lot packed in this book to expand your game worlds. The book is available now on the Ghostfire Games website through their store. You can follow the links below to grab your copy today.
And now, on to this week's episode. Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we're talking about our tips for running investigations and mysteries in Dungeons & Dragons. Now, almost every D&D story has some element of mystery or the unknown, or some sort of nefarious plot that the player characters have to uncover. But running an investigation or a traditional Sherlock Holmes style mystery presents some unique challenges in a D&D game.
Now, at the core of Dungeons & Dragons, we have the elements of combat, social engagement, or exploration. But really, a fourth pillar of a Dungeons & Dragons story is the mystery involving the characters in the quest that they're going on. And they have to piece together clues and information that they find along the way in order to unravel the major plot of the campaign setting.
Now, of course, many Dungeons & Dragons campaigns might have these mysteries and clues, but they don't really get to the level of a Sherlock Holmes style whodunit. The player characters just find a bloody note on the body of the cultist, and that tells them where the cultist's lair is. But if you're interested in involving a little bit more investigation, a little bit more sleuthing, a little bit more of that traditional detective pulpy sort of mystery in your D&D campaigns, there's a couple things that you might want to consider when you're building these sorts of stories and how you run them during your game.
There is a very thin line between creating a mystery that is overly complex that your players get lost in and are unable to solve, or having a mystery that is too easy to solve and therefore it doesn't feel like it was a mystery at all. So finding the right balance between the complexity of solving a mystery and finding clues, but having it be easy enough for the players to eventually figure out what's going on is the key to running a successful mystery in Dungeons & Dragons. There's a lot of parts to look at today, so let's get rolling.
One of the best ways to start thinking about a mystery investigation in Dungeons & Dragons is that it is a puzzle writ large. We love riddles, puzzles, and all sorts of those elements in Dungeons & Dragons, and often they're contained within a single encounter. But a mystery usually involves extrapolating that and making that the theme of the entire adventure. So the characters often have to collect clues across several different scenes to piece together who done it, where are they hiding, what is the grand conspiracy. So when we adapt these things to this larger adventure structure, what are some of the things that we might want to watch out for?
The cornerstone of any great mystery revolves around clues, and the players are going to need to find them and decipher them. The common idea is that the players walk into a room, the scene is set, and then they use investigation and perception to look for clues. However, this can actually be a problem, because if your clues are locked behind a roll of perception or investigation, what happens if nobody succeeds on that roll? Are they now locked out of obtaining those clues and pushing the plot forward? You've just stumped your own story.
There's not much for the players to interact with in that case, because you get this very kind of stiff scenario where the players say, all right, they roll up their sleeves, break out their dice and say, let's perception the room. And that doesn't feel very interactive. Rolling a perception check or an investigation check doesn't really make you feel like Sherlock Holmes.
One of the keys to solving this issue is actually making the clues easy to find, because in a mystery, it's less about finding the clues and more about deciphering the clues. So having the clues being readily available, but using investigation checks in order to obtain more information on the clue, or a bonus clue, so to speak, will help push the characters in the right direction, but also give them a chance, if you have that person in the party who has high investigation and wants to play that investigator character, they now have a chance to examine the clues presented to them, piece out more additional information, and start putting together the bigger picture.
I like to rely on my players' hunches for this. If the players find a clue and have a question about it, I usually ask them to make an investigation check, and then that check confirms whether or not their hunch is correct. You can also involve a huge array of other skills here in interpreting the clues, because perhaps you might involve nature in terms of identifying, oh, this fur came from a specific type of animal. Maybe you might involve an arcana check to determine if there was the presence of magic, and if so, what school of magic it belonged to, or even being able to confirm, oh yes, a fireball spell definitely happened here. You might even involve the character's tool proficiencies, a character proficient with cook's utensils, or a poisoner's kit, or a disguise kit, or any other types of languages, skills, tool proficiencies might be able to give the players more information that helps them contextualize the clues that they found and decipher what they mean.
So when you are designing clues, make the clue something that is relatively obvious and could point in the right direction. But then wrap up a few extra features tied to this clue that you could put roles in front of for your party to examine, investigate, and explore the possible wider plot happening. By designing clues in this way, you're giving the characters the chance to investigate and feel that mystery come to life, but you're not blocking the actual evidence behind walls of roles that could potentially be failed.
The inspiration for this actually comes from another role-playing game, the Gumshoe system by Robin Laws. In this system, characters do find the clues automatically based on their skills and proficiencies, rather than actually having to make a check to find them or not. So if you are interested in this type of play, check out the Gumshoe system. It's really well designed.
Moving on to our second point, this is about the player's ability to decipher clues. A lot of times you may think you've put an obvious clue in front of your party, and they completely fail to realize that it is a clue at all. The trick is that sometimes you need multiple versions of the same clue in different ways, leading them to the same outcome. The reason for this is if you have a room full of objects and one of them is a clue, chances are that it's going to be hard to tell that that's the clue aside from all the other objects. If you have 3 to 5 items that all point to the same conclusion, they can now start to piece together that this is the clue that they're looking for, and it leads them on the right path.
In my experience, the first clue the players find doesn't even register them that it might actually be a clue, and they miss it or ignore it. The second clue that they find, they usually horrifically misinterpret. And the third clue is what makes them go, oh, now the other 2 clues make sense. So as a rule of thumb, I try to include multiple clues, and I usually find that it takes more than 3. Sometimes it takes 4 or 5. And a good shout out to Justin Alexander at the Alexandrian for introducing this idea of the 3 clue rule. It's a really important one for making sure your players don't miss the hint.
Don't be afraid of peppering in a large amount of clues to lead them to the next location you want them to get to. You might think that they're straightforward, but when presenting the information to the group of players, it's not that your players are stupid. It's just that sometimes what is obvious to you because you're the one writing the mystery is not obvious to a group of people who do not know what the answer is. So being able to piece things together in a much broader way is actually beneficial to helping them to move along with the story.
It's really difficult when you're designing a mystery to register for yourself how obvious it is, because oftentimes I made a mystery and I'm like, this is so obvious that they're going to get this right away, and then they struggled for 3 game sessions trying to figure it out. Don't be afraid of giving more information. Usually it's much harder to decode the mystery than what you expect it will be, and having more information means that you have a lot of outs and a lot of safety nets if your players are struggling. I often try to listen really closely to my players as they're interpreting the clues, And the flip side of this is that if it seems like your players have got it really, really early, or they say something that is like, oh, that is the correct answer, don't panic. Part of what makes a good mystery is foreshadowing. And it's oftentimes just as satisfying to be right as it is to be surprised.
I will also say that this really magical thing sometimes happens at the table where you present the clue and the first person at the table goes, oh, I think the answer is this, and they nail it. And you just sit there with your poker face on, and it moves to the second person who goes, but what if it's this? And suddenly a 20-minute conversation breaks out, and you sit there smiling, knowing that they pretty much had it right at the beginning, but it still took them a path to get there. And the other point to that is your goal as the dungeon master designing this is not to block the characters from solving the mystery. No, the goal is that they are going to solve the mystery. That's the fun of the game. So by presenting more information or putting additional clues, you're just helping them along that path. If they solve it early, you can still watch them scramble for a little bit, making sure that that's the right decision. And then, yes, it pushes them forward, and that's what you want out of your mystery campaign.
I will also say that because players have a tendency to misinterpret clues or to draw false conclusions, you probably don't need to inject your own intentional red herrings. The players are going to do that for you. And so injecting misinformation that throws them off the trail can actually really damage their ability to decode the main clues because they're going to mess up on their own. You don't need to help them with that.
One really important thing to keep in mind is that this is a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. A lot of times when we set out to create a mystery, we look at classic things like Sherlock Holmes. But Sherlock Holmes didn't have spells at the ready to use to decipher the clues. Be aware of the impact that magic can have on your setting.
Your players are going to find inventive ways to use magic to collect clues in ways that you might not have anticipated. Spells such as Speak with Animals, Detect Magic, Suggestion, Zone of Truth, Speak with Dead, Dominate Person can all be used to interrogate witnesses or gain information from unexpected witnesses like dead bodies and animals. Even in a recent campaign, I was not expecting a ranger to bust out Speak with Animals to question the pig that happened to be on the scene. And you have to plan for that. You're better planning on what happens when the players use those spells and what information they gain from using them than trying to find ways to shut those spells down. Players should be rewarded for using their abilities in ways. And these spells were designed to be used in these ways. So if all of your villains are mind blanked, don't remember anything, their tongues and heads have been cut off, their minds can't be read, all the animals never saw anything, it actually gets really frustrating with players because they see something on their character sheet and want an opportunity to use it, and now they've been denied that. So embrace it rather than resist it.
A really great rule of thumb here is that when you are creating your mystery, just have some point form, one-sentence notes about what some things that could have happened in the area might be. The idea of this list is that if any plants, animals, or dead are in the area who end up getting spoken to through magic, you have a few one-sentence responses of like, yeah, I saw some creatures here the other day. But these are the sorts of things that you don't need to divulge the entire mystery because an animal or plant was there. Animals, plants might not know exactly what's going on, but they can answer simple questions about, yeah, there were people here yesterday, and yeah, one of them killed another. And we saw it right here. I think maybe it was an elf. There's a piece of information that might lead them further into the mystery, but without giving them everything.
Another great way that you can even use this to your advantage is having certain clues that can only be discovered by magic. I've built murder mysteries for higher level players that have required them to use spells such as scrying and contact other plane, because that was the only way to get the information that they needed to get. This is only something that I would do for a group that is very genre savvy and is experienced with using these spells, but it can feel very, very satisfying to build a campaign that requires the use of high-level magic to decipher exactly what's going on.
When you are delivering clues, keep in mind that you are the player's eyes and ears. They listen to what you say, and they determine what the truths of the world are based on what you've presented to them. It's really important to keep a good poker face when you're presenting mysteries, and specifically if they are questioning NPCs. This is where it gets really tricky, because NPCs are sometimes able to state their opinions, but their opinions might not be the whole truth. And that can be really hard to play out as a DM, where you are presenting something that isn't the whole truth, that might be not necessarily a lie, but is just an educated opinion from the point of view of that NPC, and trying to broadcast that in a way that the players then have to also decipher. If you have multiple NPCs to interrogate, this becomes much more interesting, and you can do things like have one person whose opinion is slightly contrasted to everybody else's. They now stand out as a prime witness. But if you only have one NPC, you don't want them to be, I'm not saying anything, because that's going to block the path that the characters are trying to take as well. So by presenting this sort of atmosphere of either multiple witnesses who all have opinions, showcasing something that is different from everything else, it allows you to continue to be the DM who is presenting situations, but without having an NPC who is outright lying to them and it's the only person they get to talk to, or is withholding information.
Yeah, and just another note about that poker face. It's really important to work on your delivery when you are talking about clues, and when you are enacting an NPC who might have an opinion, or who might be an unreliable witness, or who might just be completely misinterpreting what they saw. It's very important to highlight to the players that this is that person's perspective. The notion of an unreliable witness, I find, is one of the most difficult things for players to encounter in a tabletop role-playing game. And my players have often been very surprised when they've encountered NPCs who aren't lying, but who are just wrong about what they saw.
Inevitably, when they are following the breadcrumbs and clues on their mystery journey, they might end up going in the wrong direction, following a red herring that they themselves created, or just looking for something that doesn't exist.
The classic example of this is when the players decide, we need to find a cleric of Tymora. Clearly Tymora is involved. Or we need to go out into the forest and start looking for blood tracks. When the clerics of Tymora aren't involved at all, and there are no blood tracks in the forest at all. And so what happens is now the players are looking for information. They're going on a complete tangent that is a total dead end. I've talked to dungeon masters who've shared their stories of their players going down a wrong path like this and embroiling their players in a waste of time that lasted multiple game sessions. Do not do this. If your players have gone down a total dead end, you can stop and say, you spend the next, roll a die, 6 hours questioning witnesses and looking for clerics of Tymora, or you spend the next 4 days looking through the woods. At the end of your investigations, you conclusively determine that this was a dead end. Sometimes in an investigation, and particularly this is actually true of real-life investigations, a lot of time gets spent ruling out the impossible.
A second option is to actually have what they are investigating circle back to the main plot. If they really want to investigate further into something that is not going to conclusively help them, what you can do is have a few clues set aside that could help lead them back to the main mystery that they need to solve. And wherever they go, wherever they are investigating, whatever they are looking for, present one of those clues to them that has them go, oh, this leads us back to the town that we were in a few days ago, so we should go back there and continue our investigation. By doing this, you kind of wrap it back around and course correct them. Let them engage with their tangent, but only a little bit before they realize that there is a bigger mystery that needs to be solved elsewhere. In this particular instance, maybe the first place they go to, they find a cleric of Tymora, and that cleric says to them, no, we're not involved, but we've actually been looking into this mystery as well. Maybe we can help you out, and here's what we have found. And it leads them back to the main puzzle that they need to solve.
Now, the final option is to embrace it, retcon your mystery and redesign things. Turns out the clerics of Tymora are involved. There are bodies in the forest. This is a little bit on the most improvisational side of things and is something I would only recommend to a very confident dungeon master. But if your players go down the wrong path, you can just decide that's not the wrong path anymore and make it the right path. And your players will get excited by it and see where it goes. You have to be careful with this because if you've designed a really tightly woven mystery, you could run into trouble with some logical inconsistencies. But hopefully your players aren't going to notice. I mean, it's not like they're watching a television show and can rewatch your campaign. They might think about it later, but they might be also forgiving of some retcons along the way. These options with the players going down the wrong path can sometimes feel the most railroady of all your solutions, and it is a delicate balance. You really want to make sure that in the process of preventing your campaign from becoming derailed, that you don't railroad the players by just stonewalling them completely. With all these solutions, you want to allow the characters to explore their options, but come in with that helping hand that either says, you know what, guys, you kind of went down the wrong path here, and brings them back into the main mystery.
I also have a strong argument against the idea of railroading. Railroading to me is something very specific. It is when the dungeon master presents an option that forces the players to take a course of action. You don't give them the choice at all. Railroading to me is when you say, oh, you're arriving in town, you go straight to the bar and there's an NPC at the bar who tells you this. They never got to choose to go to the bar. They never got to choose to talk to the NPC. That to me is railroading. What we are doing here is we are making sure that the campaign plot line that we are presenting stays in focus. And that can be a wide sandbox area for them to explore. But there's a chance that they diverge wholly from this sandbox that you've created. The mystery in itself can be a sandbox that they can explore in many number of ways. But the goal is to keep them focused on the relevant mystery at hand. And if you see them branching out too far, you're not saying, you're wrong and I'm railroading you back into it. You're saying, actually, here's what you find, and it brings you back to the plot.
One of the other big ways where railroading becomes a problem in mystery scenarios is when you get really inspired by pulp adventure movies and decide that now is the time where you have to have a chase scene. Or this is the showdown between the pulp hero and the serial killer. Where railroading happens is you as a dungeon master have said, okay, this mystery ends with them finding the serial killer's hideout and having an epic showdown. And so the possibility of your players maybe catching the serial killer in a different location, or not bothering with that epic chase scene, or finding some other way to apprehend the villain or to solve the mystery. That's actually something that you should embrace. If you have a specific set piece conclusion in mind for your mystery, that might be something that you might want to walk away from and be open to the players deciding, how is this mystery going to get resolved?
The thing with a mystery novel is that the writer of the novel already knows how all the pieces are going to fit together and gets to broadcast the player choices. In this case, the character choices in the book are determined wholly by the writer. In a game of Dungeons and Dragons, you don't get to decide what the players are going to do. Their characters can piece things together in really interesting ways. They could solve the puzzle much faster than you would in a novel. They could solve it much slower. They could find clues that you didn't even intend for them to be there. They could draw wild conclusions that are actually accurate or really far off base. You have no idea. So you do need to approach the mystery in a little bit of a looser fashion and just have the clues and the ideas there, and then have what the person or whatever they're trying to solve, have that just exist in the world in its own capacity. How they find it, how they stumble upon it, and how they engage with it is up to them.
A great way to expand on this as well is not having your mystery be a static thing. The serial killer is going to kill again. The evil cult has a date in mind for when they are going to begin the summoning ritual. And one of the most interesting dynamics that you can introduce in a mystery campaign is a ticking clock. Your players must solve the mystery before the really bad thing happens again. And you can actually create several warnings and new scenarios and new situations and really throw a wrench in your players' plans by having the villains respond to the investigators. That's one of the most dynamic and satisfying things about a pulp novel, is when the villain gets aware, oh, I'm being investigated, so now we're going to play cat and mouse together.
Our final point about running mysteries and intrigue in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign involves the lore of your world. Sometimes you work endlessly on the great lore of your homebrew setting, and you might want your players to engage with that lore. So what you do is you tie the clues to the lore of your world. But this can actually be a really big downfall if the players haven't engaged previously with these lore and themes that you are presenting. If you are going to tie clues and the mystery to the lore of your world that you have made up, you need to present that lore early on. If there's a certain star sign that means something in the mystery that they need to follow the clues related to that star sign, you need to have text and NPCs talking about the star signs much earlier in the campaign before they're even aware that there was a mystery. That way, when it starts to become apparent, it's something that they've seen multiple times and understand. A lot of times the lore for your world is broadcast in small pieces throughout the narrative of your story. Some people make a large document, and a lot of players don't end up reading those large documents. So if on page 15 of the lore document that you gave your players at the beginning of your campaign was a clue that would help them solve the mystery, that's not a great clue, because they may have missed it, they probably won't remember it, and it's not in front of them enough for them to engage with it. So be very careful about this.
One other note about the lore of your world, particularly with world building, is that consider how investigations might affect the genre and the perception of your world as a whole. Things like forensic science, criminal investigations, the modern systems of incarceration and policing are very contemporary and modern ideas that have a short history. There are many periods in history, many of which Dungeons & Dragons draws its inspiration from, where trials were largely a sham, and investigations were not even a thing that happened, especially for common folk. The Town Watch don't necessarily investigate the murder of the fishmonger's wife. They just say, sorry. There's no investigator that's going to follow that up. And so if you have a world that really is a low fantasy, sort of gritty fantasy, medieval sort of world, the idea of a murder mystery investigation might be kind of foreign to the people living in that world. At the same time, if you do have a city guard that exists in your world that investigates crimes and has investigators and sergeants and has a system of incarceration, that says a very different thing about how the politics and society of your world are organized. So you might want to consider these things when you are planning a mystery and how you want your world to be perceived, because that does affect things. Players in some of my campaigns are often surprised when they're like, aren't you investigating this murder? And the town guard go, no. What's an investigation? It's an important thing to consider.
Also, if you are presenting a world where investigation is a thing and incarceration and the town guard are competent and doing this investigation, it might create a situation where the player characters are actually overstepping the law. And although the town guard are going to take a lot longer to solve this, they don't want the player characters involved. They're just random weirdos who showed up in town on their own mission and are now also tied up in this mystery. So that creates another interesting dynamic where your player characters now need to work outside the law and not only hide from the law, but also investigate the mystery on their own terms. So deciding these sorts of dynamics in your world and setting can really impact a mystery campaign.
For a lot of inspiration, though, if you are interested in running mysteries in worlds involving magic, check out the Dresden Files books as well as the Witcher series. They do a really, really good job of integrating themes of magic and the supernatural into sort of a detective fiction sort of context. And I think that for anyone that does want to run a mystery investigation in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, you gotta read these books to really master the genre.
Read them even if you're not, because they're just amazing.
Yes, they're amazing. They're great books.
Dresden Files is one of my favorite book series, period.
Yeah.
Check it out. So this has been our top 5 tips for running mystery and intrigue in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Tell us about some of your greatest mysteries that you've encountered or solved in the comments below.
We created this episode with the amazing assistance of our Patreon supporters through one of our monthly writers' rooms. We have an amazing Discord community available exclusively to our patrons, where our patrons can chat with us, talk with us about upcoming episodes ideas, get advice for their campaigns, and even talk about our Drakkenheim live stream series. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube and want to interact with us some more, consider joining our Patreon community. You can find out how by following the links in the description below.
Also, our live play campaign, Dungeons of Drakkenheim, is coming to Kickstarter. We've partnered with Ghostfire Games to bring this campaign to life as a 5th edition module. You can follow the links below to join the mailing list to be up to date on all information regarding the Kickstarter. Also, you can check out our live plays in the Worlds of Drakkenheim, which airs on Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've got plenty more great advice for Dungeon Masters running games D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
In the dungeon.